From the editors of Biological Psychiatry and the Society for Biological Psychiatry, this is Biological Psychiatry Live, and I'm Dr. Tamara Gore, the social media editor, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Laura Bean. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Dr. Laura Bean. I'm an assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at Haverford College, which is a small liberal arts college just outside of Philadelphia.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're discussing your paper that's about to come out here in Biological Psychiatry and is focused on postpartum anxiety. So if I could start by asking you, what is currently known mechanistically about postpartum anxiety?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we do know is that mental health complications like mood and affective disorders are actually the most common complication associated with childbirth. Postpartum anxiety specifically can either occur concurrently with other postpartum psychological disorders like postpartum depression, or it can occur as a unique postpartum mental health condition. Oftentimes in postpartum anxiety, the anxiety symptoms are related to the new caregiving responsibilities, so things like feeding or sleeping or the baby's health or well-being. But what we don't know is whether the neural mechanisms in postpartum anxiety actually differ from anxiety disorders outside of the postpartum period. That's something that's not really well understood, probably because it's understudied.
I would agree about that. So what new information does your study provide?
Yeah, so what we know is that during pregnancy, estrogen levels rise and they rise precipitously. So most of that estrogen is actually coming from the placenta, and those placental estrogens increase anywhere between 100 and 1,000-fold during the third trimester. So it's a really, really big increase. But then after birth, the placenta is expelled, and so those estrogen levels drop, and they drop quickly, and they remain suppressed then until ovulation resumes, which can be weeks to even months later. And so a lot of people have hypothesized that this sort of rapid and dramatic drop in estrogen during the postpartum period can cause what people have termed an estrogen withdrawal state in women that can contribute to the etiology of postpartum psychological disorders like postpartum anxiety. So in my lab, we use an animal model of postpartum estrogen withdrawal to try to get at some of those causal relationships between changes in anxiety-like behavior and potential changes in the brain. This model was first developed in rats by Lisa Goulea's group at the University of British Columbia. And so the way that it works in this model is that you ovaryectomize female rodents and then give them daily hormone injections that mimic the changes in estrogen during pregnancy and then during the postpartum period. And so what we and others have found is that if you use this model and withdraw animals from estrogen the same way that you would see during the postpartum period, it results in a behavioral phenotype that can reflect things like depressed mood or heightened anxiety. So we used that in this study, and we found that estrogen withdrawn females had changes in the number of oxytocin immunoreactive cells. So they had more oxytocin immunoreactive cells in the paraventricular hypothalamus, as well as more oxytocin mRNA, more gene expression in the paraventricular hypothalamus. And then postsynaptically, we also found a change in oxytocin receptor density in the dorsal raphe nucleus. So this is a brainstem nucleus that we know is really important for serotonin projections to the rest of the brain. And so what we did is we actually blocked those oxytocin receptors in the dorsal raphe during estrogen withdrawal. And we found that when we did, we actually could prevent the high anxiety behavioral phenotype that we see in these estrogen withdrawn females.
That's so interesting. Can I ask, estrogen withdrawal happens in all women, but not all women get postpartum anxiety. Does your study help ask that question, why that happens, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. You're absolutely right? All women experience this estrogen withdrawal, but only some portion of them go on to experience postpartum anxiety. So what's the difference, right? How do we determine which women go on to experience this and not? And we don't know yet. So this study doesn't address that, but something that we would really like to address in the future is try to understand what could cause that differentiation. One hypothesis that we have is that it might be related to environmental stressors during the peripartum period. And so we have some future experiments planned where we're hoping to address exactly that.
Sounds really interesting, and I look forward to seeing those results. Finally, can you tell us, at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned that you're at Haverford College, which is a small liberal arts college. Tell us about the unique nature of your research lab and how you employ undergraduate researchers?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that. So yes, you're exactly right. It's a small liberal arts college, which means that we have no grad students, no postdocs, usually no technicians. So my entire research program is driven entirely by undergraduates. The data for this paper was generated primarily by 12 undergraduate students across 3 years of research. So most of it was senior thesis research that they did for their senior thesis data. And yeah, I have found that undergraduate students, if you give them sort of the right structure and the right training, they can do anything that graduate students and postdocs do. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time and a little bit more planning, but we were really excited to see these data get published in a journal like Biological Psychiatry. And it was really exciting, I think, for the students to see not only sort of the data collection and the writing process, but also the peer review process, and kind of have a front row seat to how peer review can really improve a paper. And I think that in particular in this group of those 12 students, many of them have either gone on already or plan to go on to either graduate school or medical school. So I feel excited that this could be a part of their early training process as future scientists or physicians.
How inspirational. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Have a great day.
You too.